Marcus Brooks stood in a boardroom he had no business being in, wearing a navy suit that cost less than the coffee machine on the credenza behind him. 6 faces stared back. Robert Keene, general counsel, fingers laced like a man about to deliver a eulogy. Lydia Marsh from Human Resources, her pen frozen above a legal pad she hadn't written on. Richard Hollings, the CEO, watching from a video screen mounted on the far wall, his expression the careful blankness of someone whose lawyers had coached him not to react. Victoria Sterling stood near the window, arms crossed, her charcoal blazer sharp enough to cut glass, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the parking garage. And in a chair against the wall, barely visible, Claire Nguyen clutched a manila folder like a life raft. Victoria read from a prepared statement. Her voice carried the mechanical precision of someone who had rehearsed in front of a mirror, each word scrubbed of anything that might be mistaken for feeling. She withdrew all allegations, fully, unequivocally. Marcus Brooks had acted with professionalism and integrity. Keene leaned forward, offering reinstatement, back pay, an additional $47,000 in compensation for distress. The number hung in the air like an auction bid. Marcus stood. The chair scraped against the floor, and the sound was the loudest thing in the room. No. Every head turned. Keene's mouth opened, then closed. Lydia's pen finally touched the pad, then stopped. My daughter asked me if I was going to jail. His voice didn't crack. He wouldn't let it. You don't fix that with a paycheck. He walked out, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded, to everyone still sitting in that room, like a verdict. To understand why Marcus Brooks refused $47,000, more money than he'd saved in the last 3 years combined, you have to go back 11 days, to a Tuesday evening in October, to a glass of water left on a coffee table, and to 5 words that burned his life to the foundation. The alarm didn't wake him. It never did. Marcus opened his eyes at 6:15 on that Tuesday morning with the automatic precision of a man whose body had learned that oversleeping was a luxury he'd forfeited 3 years ago, the day he became the only parent his daughter had left. And the apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a building on Maple Street, where the hallways smelled like other people's cooking and the elevator worked on alternating Thursdays. 2 bedrooms, $1,100 a month, which was the cheapest rent in the district that fed into Lincoln Elementary, rated 7 out of 10, the only number Marcus had cared about when he signed the lease. The ceiling above the bathroom had a water stain he'd reported to the landlord 4 times in 7 months. Nobody came. Nobody ever came. He passed the hallway wall on his way to the kitchen. Crayon drawings from 2nd grade, a lopsided yellow house, 2 stick figures labeled Me and Daddy. Next to them, a single wedding photo in a frame he'd bought at a dollar store. Marcus and Denise laughing in front of the church, her hand on his chest, his tie already crooked. That photograph was the only one he kept outside his bedroom. Maya needed to see her mother every day. He did not need to see his grief every day. Denise had been dead 3 years and 4 months. A drunk driver ran a red light while she drove home from a night shift at the hospital. 1 sentence, that was all the space he gave it. Anything more, and the morning would collapse. The kitchen barely fit 2 people standing shoulder to shoulder. He filled the kettle, cracked 3 eggs, pulled out the strawberry jam Maya had declared superior to all other jams on earth. $4.79 a jar, purchased weekly without argument, because if strawberry jam made mornings survivable, then strawberry jam was sacred. She appeared in the doorway, brown hair tangled from sleep, that wearing his old t-shirt claimed with the absolute authority only an 8-year-old could exercise, Professor tucked under her arm. Professor was a gray stuffed elephant with a left ear that had been resewn twice. The last gift Denise brought home before the accident, purchased from the hospital gift shop at the end of a 12-hour shift, still wearing the $3 price tag Maya refused to remove. Eggs scrambled, orange juice, the kind with pulp. 3 months ago, she hated pulp. Last week, she announced that juice without pulp was basically sugar water. He had no idea where she'd learned the phrase, but he had learned long ago not to argue with her evolving philosophy of breakfast. She climbed onto her chair and pulled her knees to her chest, which meant she was thinking, but he recognized the posture the way a sailor recognizes a shift in wind. "You coming home at 6? That question had started 6 months ago, after he got stuck in traffic and arrived 40 minutes late to find her sitting on the building's front steps with Mrs. Chen from apartment 3B, the retired seamstress who charged $20 for babysitting and refused to take more. Maya hadn't cried that evening. She just looked at him with those too serious eyes and held his hand all the way up the stairs without speaking. The silence had been worse than tears. "I promise. Same time. Always." She studied him for a moment, measuring the promise against some internal scale only she understood, then went back to her eggs. He let her eat. These mornings were the only still point in his turning world. Her and he protected them the way other men protected investments. At 7:30, they walked to the bus stop at the corner of Maple and 3rd, beneath a streetlight that had been broken for 9 weeks. She insisted on carrying her own backpack. He carried it anyway. They'd negotiated a silent compromise. He carried it to the last 20 feet, then handed it over so she could board the bus looking like a girl who handled her own weight. "Love you, kiddo. Love you, Daddy." She climbed the steps, turned once, found him in the cluster of parents, and smiled. A gap-toothed, unguarded, entirely trusting smile that he would remember 11 days later when everything was gone. Northway Consulting occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the financial district. Marcus had worked there 4 years as a data analyst. Not glamorous, not well paid, but stable. And stability was the currency that mattered now. Stability meant tuition at Lincoln Elementary arrived on time, groceries without checking his balance, sleep without calculating how many days stood between him and disaster. His bank account held $847. Rent was due in 9 days. The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. Team celebration. The Anchor Room. Kensington deal closed. Mandatory attendance, 7 o'clock sharp. The word mandatory meant he couldn't politely decline. It meant calling Mrs. Chen with 2 hours and 13 minutes of notice, and paying $40 he couldn't spare. The Anchor Room served $23 cocktails garnished with things no one ate, inside walls of exposed brick that probably cost more to install than actual brick. Marcus arrived in his department store navy suit, the one Janet from the analytics floor had once called good for his coloring, which he'd correctly translated as unremarkable but inoffensive. He felt the distance between himself and the room immediately. Not just income, but something older, something coded into the air. Todd Brennan, a senior associate with a handshake that lasted too long, and a laugh that carried too far, stood near the bar with 2 partners. As Marcus passed, Brennan spoke just loud enough to land. Nice of them to let the whole building in tonight. Nobody reacted. The partners smiled at nothing. Claire Nguyen, Victoria Sterling's assistant, stood 3 feet away holding a club soda. She heard it. Marcus saw her hear it. He kept walking. Some battles you don't fight at company parties. Do you file them in the place where everything accumulates until the weight becomes architectural? By 9:15, the crowd had thinned, and Victoria Sterling was leaning against the bar, her carefully maintained composure fracturing at the edges. Her eyes were glassy, her words slurred. Claire tried to convince her to call a car, and Victoria dismissed her with the waving confidence of someone who had lost the ability to judge her own condition. She tried to stand and nearly fell. Marcus crossed the room against every instinct telling him to walk the other direction. "Miss Sterling, let me call you a car." She blinked, trying to focus on his face. "Who are you?" "Marcus Brooks, Data Team." "Data." She repeated it like a word from a language she didn't speak. Claire appeared beside him, eyes desperate. Her sister was in the emergency room. To Victoria's apartment was 15 minutes away, Riverside Towers. Could he drive her? She was already pulling on her coat. Marcus looked at Victoria, swaying, unable to stand without the bar's support. He looked at the door. He calculated the cost of involvement against the cost of walking away, and the math came back the same way it always did for men who were taught that you help people even when it's inconvenient, even when it's risky, even when every survival instinct says, don't. "I'll take her." The sedan was 12 years old and smelled like fast food wrappers and the library books Maya left on the back seat. Victoria collapsed into the passenger seat, head against the window, breathing heavily. He found her address on her driver's license. Riverside Towers. Luxury building overlooking the water. In the kind of place where the lobby alone cost more than his annual rent. The drive took 18 minutes. Victoria didn't speak. Twice he thought she might be sick, but she only stared at nothing, breathing. The lobby was marble and recessed lighting. Reggie Okafor, the security guard, a broad-shouldered man with military posture and steady eyes, looked up from his desk. "Miss Sterling, all right?" "Company party. Which floor?" 14th. "Need help?" "I've got her." Apartment 14C, 3 tries with the key. Inside, minimalist furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the river, art that cost more than his car. He guided her to the couch, slipped off her heels, and placed them neatly on the floor, filled a glass with water and set it on the coffee table, draped a throw blanket over her shoulders. He typed a message to her work number. "Made sure you got home safe. Water on the table. Door is locked. Marcus Brooks." On his way out, he tested the handle. Locked. Reggie looked up. "She settled?" "On the couch. Left water." Reggie nodded and wrote in his shift log. 10:47 p.m., Marcus Brooks, Hargrove employee, escorted Ms. Sterling to 14C, departed 11:01 p.m., 14 minutes total, no issues. The kind of meticulous notation that would, in 11 days, become the most important paragraph Marcus Brooks had never read. He drove home, paid Mrs. Chen $40, checked on Maya, asleep, arm wrapped around Professor, mouth slightly open, breathing the deep, untroubled breath of a child who still believed the world was safe because her father had promised it was. He collapsed into bed at 11:30 and stared at the ceiling, at the water stain that looked different in the dark, and felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done the decent thing. The next morning, erased it. His phone buzzed at 8:47. He was halfway through his second coffee, deep in client engagement spreadsheets, when the message appeared. Victoria Sterling. 5 words. "Did you touch me last night?" His hands went cold. He read it 3 times. The office hummed around him. Keyboards, low voices, the HVAC cycling through recycled air, and none of it registered. He typed a response, deleted it, Started again. I drove you home from the anchor room. You were on the couch when I left. I didn't touch you. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. My office, 10 a.m. At 9:30, the phone rang. Internal, Lydia Marsh, Human Resources, Conference Room B, 3rd floor, are immediately. The line went dead before he could respond. The room was small and windowless. 3 people waited, Lydia, Keene in his expensive suit, and Victoria, perfectly still, hands in her lap, her face a wall. Her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly, not with anger, but with something older, something she had carried for 22 years and never named. Keene opened. We've received a complaint regarding your conduct at last night's company event, Marcus explained. Everything. The bar, Claire's request, the drive, the couch, the shoes, the water, the locked door, the 14 minutes. His voice was steady. His pulse was not. Victoria spoke once. I don't remember last night. My shoes were off. I don't remember you taking them off. Paid administrative leave, effective immediately. On surrender your access badge. Badge number 2847, collected at 10:22 a.m. Email deactivated by noon. At 2 o'clock, a 22-year-old IT intern arrived at his apartment to collect the company laptop, apologizing with every breath. Just following protocol. As if protocol explained anything. As if protocol had a daughter who would come home from school in 4 hours expecting her father to be the same man he was yesterday. Marcus sat in the silent apartment and did not move for a long time. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, a colleague. Dude, what happened? He didn't answer. There were no words that wouldn't sound either pathetic or defensive, so he chose silence, which sounded like both. Somewhere across the city, in a luxury apartment overlooking the water, Victoria Sterling stared at her phone and felt the machinery she'd set in motion grinding forward without her, carrying a man she barely knew toward a cliff she hadn't meant to build. What neither of them knew, what nobody at Northway Consulting knew except a 28-year-old assistant who had spent 3 years watching and keeping quiet, was that Marcus Brooks was not the first. In 6 years, 73 complaints from minority employees had entered Hargrove and Sterling's HR system. 68 were dismissed. 5 resulted in terminations. Every single one, the person who'd been accused, repackaged as performance issues, scrubbed clean, filed away. 0 investigations had ever resulted in management accountability. 0. And the woman who had access to every one of those files had just watched it happen again in real time, so to a man whose only crime was kindness. Claire Nguyen set down her club soda, opened her laptop, and began to type. 3 floors below, Marcus Brooks' phone rang. Mrs. Chen, his neighbor, her voice careful in the way people speak when they're trying not to alarm you. Marcus, honey, Maya's school called. Something happened. She's fine, but you should come. The October wind hit him as he stepped outside, sharp enough to remind him that winter was closer than he'd prepared for. He hadn't dug out Maya's coat yet. He hadn't fixed the loose button. He'd been planning to do it this weekend, back when this weekend still belonged to him. He drove toward Lincoln Elementary at a speed that was not quite legal, and the only thought in his head, louder than the engine, louder than the fear, louder than every terrible possibility assembling itself behind his eyes, was a single, searing certainty. Whatever had happened to his daughter, the world had just changed shape, and he would never be able to push it back. He made the 12-minute drive in 7, ran 2 yellow lights and didn't remember either of them. Lincoln Elementary sat behind a chain link fence on a street lined with maples that had already started dropping their leaves, and the parking lot was nearly empty because school wouldn't let out for another hour, which meant whatever had happened was bad enough that they hadn't waited. The principal's office smelled like carpet cleaner and institutional calm. Maya sat on a plastic chair with her feet dangling 3 inches above the floor, Professor pressed against her ribs, her face doing the thing that frightened Marcus more than tears. Complete stillness. An 8-year-old should not know how to go that quiet. Mrs. Patterson, her teacher, stood near the window with her arms folded and the careful expression of someone who had rehearsed what she was about to say. A few students made comments during lunch. One girl, Caitlin Hargrove, told Maya that her father did something bad to a white lady, that her mom told her. Several children repeated it. Maya didn't respond. She put her head on the table and stopped talking. Marcus knelt until his eyes were level with his daughter's. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him the night Denise didn't come home, searching for something solid in a world that had just shifted beneath her. "Daddy, did you hurt somebody?" "No, never." "Then why does everybody think you did?" He had no answer. The silence between them was the loudest thing he'd ever heard, louder than the boardroom, louder than Keene's legal terminology, louder than 5 words on a phone screen, because this silence belonged to his daughter. And she was 8, and she was asking him to explain a world he couldn't make sense of himself. In the car, she didn't speak for 6 blocks. Professor sat on her lap, one resewn ear bent forward. The traffic light at Maple and 3rd turned red, and in the stillness of the stopped car, with the engine idling and the October light falling sideways through the windshield, she asked the question he had been dreading since the day she was born. "Daddy, is it because we're black?" His hands tightened on the wheel. 8 years old, 3 feet 11 inches, 52 pounds, and she already knew to ask. Some people make decisions about others before they know them. That's not about us. That's about them. But it happens to us. Yeah, it does. She turned back to the window. He drove the rest of the way home with his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached, holding everything inside because she needed him to be solid, needed him to be the wall between her and the thing that had just walked into her classroom and sat down beside her like it belonged there. That night, after she fell asleep with Professor tucked under her chin and the blanket pulled to her ears, Marcus sat in his car in the building's parking lot and broke. Not the controlled grief he'd rationed out after Denise's funeral, measured and private. This was structural. This came from the load-bearing part of him, or the part that had held everything up for 3 years, and it cracked the way foundations crack, silently at first, then all at once. He wept until his chest hurt, until the windshield fogged from his breathing, until he had nothing left. Then he wiped his face, locked the car, and went back upstairs, because Maya would wake at 6:15 and expect eggs, and the world did not pause for a man's breaking. The weekend passed in a kind of suspended silence. Marcus made meals, helped with homework, watched Maya build a baking soda volcano for her science project. 3rd place at the fair last year. This year she was aiming for 1st. And pretended that the apartment didn't feel like a stage set waiting for an audience that would never arrive. She pretended not to notice him pretending, that they were both becoming experts at protecting each other from the truth. On Monday morning, his phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Claire Nguyen. I was Victoria Sterling's assistant. I was at the Anchor Room that night. I saw everything. A pause. And I need to tell you something that's going to change how you see what happened to you. They met at a coffee shop 4 blocks outside the financial district, the kind of place where nobody from Northway would wander. Claire was 28, precise in her movements, and visibly nervous. She set a USB drive on the table between them, the way someone might set down a grenade. I've worked at Hargrove and Sterling for 3 years. I manage Victoria's calendar, her correspondence, her files, which means I sit in on HR review committee meetings. Which means I've seen things. She opened her laptop. Spreadsheets, dates, names, a pattern so clean it looked almost intentional, which, she explained, was because it was. In 6 years, 73 complaints have been filed by minority employees. Discrimination in pay, harassment, wrongful termination, hostile work environment. 68 were dismissed. Insufficient evidence every single time. The remaining 5 resulted in terminations. She looked at him. Of the complainants, not the accused, everyone was repackaged as a performance issue, scrubbed from the record. Marcus stared at the screen. 73 names. 73 people who had walked into an HR office believing the system would protect them and walked out carrying the weight of proof that it wouldn't. Does Todd Brennan, the one who made that comment at the party, has 11 complaints against him in 4 years. Racial remarks, exclusion from meetings, credit theft. 11 complaints, 3 promotions, 0 disciplinary action. Why are you showing me this? Because I watched them erase you in 47 minutes for doing something decent. And I've watched Todd Brennan get rewarded for years for doing the opposite. Her voice steadied. I could lose everything for this. But 73 people already lost everything. And nobody noticed. Marcus picked up the USB drive. It weighed almost nothing. It contained enough to bring down a $200 million company. What do you want me to do with this? Whatever you think is right. But don't just fight for yourself, Marcus. Fight for the 73. He spent the next 8 days becoming the thing Northway Consulting had never anticipated. A data analyst who turned his own skill set against the institution that had trained him. He built spreadsheets the way he'd always built them, meticulous and cross-referenced, except now the metrics weren't client engagement figures destined for a report nobody would read. They were people, exposed, quantified, undeniable. He contacted the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission on day 2. Filed a preliminary intake form citing Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Executive Order 11,246, which governs federal contractors. And Hargrove and Sterling held 3 active federal contracts worth a combined $14.6 million. He spent 4 hours reading case law on 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, pattern and practice discrimination, and disparate impact theory, taking notes in the same careful handwriting he used for Maya's permission slips. He called 12 former employees from the list Claire had provided. 9 agreed to talk. 7 had stories that mirrored his own, with the terrible precision of a machine producing identical parts. Reginald Carter, former financial engineer, terminated in 2021. I made $67,000. The white analyst in the same role, same experience level, $89,000. I asked HR about it. They said, market adjustment. I asked, for who? They said, performance-based. My client retention rate was 94.2%, highest in the department. 3 weeks later, I was gone. Danielle Washington, former senior analyst, terminated in 2022. Well, Todd Brennan told me I was surprisingly articulate for someone from my background. I reported it. HR said it was a compliment taken out of context. I was reassigned to a different floor. He got my corner office. 7 stories. 7 variations of the same wound. Marcus compiled them into a single document. Names, dates, salary comparisons, complaint numbers, outcomes. And for the first time since that Tuesday night, he felt something other than helplessness. Not anger, something colder. Precision. He found Adrian Cole on day 6, senior partner at Cole & Mitchum, civil rights litigation, 17 years of practice. A voice on the phone that carried the weight of someone who had heard this story before and was tired of hearing it, but not tired enough to stop fighting. She reviewed his file in 48 hours and called him back at 9 a.m. on a Thursday. Mr. Brooks, this isn't a wrongful termination case. This is a pattern and practice discrimination case. Federal level, EEOC referral, potential Department of Justice interest. A pause. How many families are we talking about? 73, maybe more. If your data holds, and from what I've seen, it holds, this goes well beyond your individual complaint. We're looking at systemic wage disparity averaging $18,400 annually between white employees and employees of color in equivalent positions. Total estimated damages across 6 years, $4.2 million. The number sat in the air between them like something with mass, but Hargrove and Sterling had not survived 40 years by being slow. On day 9, Robert Keene's office discovered that Claire Nguyen had accessed restricted HR files 14 times over 3 months. The IT security logs were unambiguous. Claire was summoned, questioned for 11 minutes, and terminated for violation of data security protocol. She was escorted from the building carrying a cardboard box and the particular expression of someone who had known the cost before she paid it, and had decided the cost was acceptable. That same afternoon, Marcus received a letter, not an email, a letter, printed on Northway letterhead, hand-delivered to his apartment by courier. Any dissemination of proprietary company data will result in immediate legal action. Consider this formal notice. Robert Keene, General Counsel. Marcus called Adrian. His voice carried the first real fear she'd heard from him. They're threatening me. Good. Scared companies send threatening letters. Confident companies send nothing. The fact that they're spending money on couriers means they know what you have. She paused. Don't stop. Don't slow down. And don't delete anything. But threat letters don't pay rent. Marcus sat at the kitchen table that evening with his bank statement pulled up on his phone. $312. And the stack of bills arranged in order of urgency. Rent, $1,100, due in 4 days. Maya's dental appointment next month, $180. Electricity, gas. The grocery list he'd already cut twice. The severance offer from Keene still sat in a drawer. $14,100 after taxes. 3 months of breathing room. All it required was his silence. He pulled the document out. Read it again. The language was clean, professional, designed to make surrender feel like mutual agreement, non-disclosure, non-disparagement, full release of claims. In exchange, enough money to keep his daughter fed and housed while he looked for work. He picked up a pen. Daddy? Maya stood in the kitchen doorway, Professor hanging from one hand, her pajama shirt, his old t-shirt, hanging past her knees. Why are those papers making you sad? They're not making me sad, sweetheart. They're making me think. About what? about whether doing the right thing is worth it when it's really, really hard. She considered this with the grave attention she gave to everything: science projects, breakfast orders, the relative merits of pulp versus no pulp. Her face shifted through something he couldn't read, and then she spoke with the plainness of a child who has not yet learned to qualify truth. Mom always said, hard things are the most important things. Marcus looked at his daughter, looked at the paper, looked at his daughter again. Denise's voice carried forward through the only vessel that mattered, landing in a kitchen that smelled like scrambled eggs and strawberry jam at the exact moment he needed to hear it. Yeah, she did. He put the pen down, unsigned. He folded the document and placed it back in the drawer, and when he closed it, the sound was quieter than a boardroom door, but carried the same weight. The next morning, Adrian called with the update he hadn't dared expect. The EEOC had received his file and opened a formal inquiry, although the FBI Financial Crimes Division had flagged interest. Hargrove's 3 federal contracts meant that systematic pay discrimination wasn't just an HR violation, it was a potential breach of Executive Order 11,246, carrying penalties that started at contract termination and escalated to federal prosecution. This isn't just an HR problem anymore, Marcus. This is federal, and they know it. Across the city, Victoria Sterling sat in her apartment and read the same EEOC notification that had arrived on Keene's desk that morning. She knew Marcus was behind it. She should have been angry. Instead, she opened the files Claire had left on the shared drive before IT scrubbed her access. 73 names, 73 complaint summaries, 73 outcomes she had personally voted to dismiss in committee meetings she attended every quarter for 4 years. She had never read the full files. She had read the executive summaries prepared by Lydia Marsh, 2 paragraphs each, antiseptic and conclusive. And she had voted the way the room voted, because the room always voted the same way. And she had never once looked down to see what she was standing on. 73 people, 68 dismissed, and she had signed her name on every resolution. The woman who had panicked over a gap in her memory, who had let a 22-year-old wound drive her to destroy a stranger's life with 5 words and a phone call to HR, now sat with the full architecture of the thing she'd been part of, and for the first time, the scale of it was visible. Not her own mistake, which was singular and correctable, but the system that had made her mistake so efficient, so procedurally seamless, that a man could go from employee to suspect to ghost in 47 minutes, and no one in the building would lose a minute of sleep. She closed the laptop, pressed her palms against her eyes, and understood, with a clarity that arrived like nausea, that correcting the record on Marcus Brooks would not be enough. The record was 73 names long, and her signature was on all of them. Marcus spent the final evening before the meeting doing the only thing that still made complete sense to him. He ironed his navy suit, the same one, the only one, and hung it on the bedroom door. He polished his shoes, which had been resoled twice and still held, and he organized the evidence folder Adrian had prepared, 47 pages, tabbed and color-coded, containing enough documented truth to reshape a company or ruin a man, depending on which side of the table you sat on. At 10 p.m., he stood in Maya's doorway. She was asleep, Professor wedged between her chin and the pillow, the blanket kicked halfway off because she slept like she argued, with full commitment and no regard for tidiness. The hallway light caught the crayon drawings and the wedding photo, and for a moment the apartment felt less like a place where he was surviving, and more like a place where something was being built. Slowly, out of materials most people wouldn't consider strong enough. He spoke quietly, not to Maya, not exactly to anyone. Denise, I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I'm doing it. He turned off the hallway light, checked the front door lock, set his alarm for 6:15, although he knew he wouldn't need it, lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling where the water stain waited, patient and unchanged, the one thing in his life that had stayed exactly where it was. Tomorrow, he would walk into a boardroom at Hargrove and Sterling for the last time, not as employee number 2847, not as a suspect, not as a man asking permission to exist in a building that had been built on the silence of 73 people who looked like him. He would walk in as the man who said no. $312 in his account, a daughter sleeping 10 feet away, and 47 pages that carried the weight of 6 years of institutional silence, ready to speak. Conference Room A was not Conference Room B, and as it was twice the size, windowed on 2 sides, with a mahogany table long enough to seat 14, and a view of the financial district skyline that existed solely to remind the people inside that they mattered. Marcus had never been in this room. Employees at his level were not invited to rooms with views. He arrived at 9:47, 13 minutes early. His navy suit was pressed, his shoes polished, his folder tucked under his arm. 47 pages, tabbed in 5 colors, each section containing the kind of documented truth that doesn't need volume to be heard. Adrienne Cole walked beside him, a leather briefcase in one hand, her posture carrying the particular authority of a woman who had spent 17 years walking into rooms designed to make people like her feel small, and had long since stopped feeling anything of the sort. Reggie Okafor sat on a bench in the hallway outside, his shift log resting on his knee, wearing the same quiet readiness Marcus had noticed the night he carried Victoria through the lobby. A witness, present and unhurried, waiting to confirm what the cameras had already shown. Inside, Robert Keene at one end of the table, his legal pad already half filled. Lydia Marsh beside him, her face arranged into the professional neutrality of someone who understood that her career in this building now had an expiration date. Richard Hollings, in person for the first time, 61 years old, silver-haired, seated at the head of the table with the stillness of a man who had been briefed extensively and had not enjoyed any of it. Victoria Sterling stood near the far window, arms at her sides, looking diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the room's scale and everything to do with what she had come here to say. Adrienne opened the folder and placed the first document on the table. Her voice was level, factual, emptied of everything except precision. Mr. Hollings, we're here because Marcus Brooks was wrongfully suspended and coerced toward resignation based on unsubstantiated allegations. But we're also here because Mr. Brooks's experience exposed a pattern of discrimination at this company that spans 6 years, affects 73 employees, and implicates 3 active federal contracts. She laid out the timeline, not Marcus's. His was a single thread in a larger fabric. Tuesday night. The Anchor Room. 14 minutes in apartment 14C. Security footage. Reggie's log. The text message. The 5-word accusation. And the 47-minute dismantling of a 4-year career. She presented each fact the way Marcus had taught himself to present data. Clean, sourced, inarguable. Victoria stepped forward without being asked. Her voice was stripped of the mechanical precision she'd used in the cold open reading. This was different. This was a woman standing in the wreckage of her own authority, choosing to speak plainly for perhaps the first time in her professional life. I need to correct the record. I reviewed all available evidence, security footage, guard testimony, the timeline. Marcus Brooks acted with integrity. Nothing inappropriate occurred. The complaint originated from my own confusion and fear, and I withdraw it fully. Keene shifted. Hollings's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to the arm of his chair, gripping it slightly. Victoria wasn't finished. I also need to state that I served on the HR review committee for 4 years. I signed resolutions dismissing complaints I never fully read. 68 of them. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked, and I voted the way the room voted. And I need that on the record, too. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Marcus to hear the ventilation system cycling through the ceiling and the faint sound of traffic 14 floors below. The ordinary world continuing without any awareness of what was happening in this room. Adrienne turned to the second section of the folder, slide after slide projected onto the wall-mounted screen. 73 complaints, 6 years, 68 dismissals. The average salary disparity, $18,400 per year between white employees and employees of color in equivalent roles. Todd Brennan, 11 complaints, 3 promotions, 0 consequences. Total estimated damages, $4.2 million. 3 federal contracts governed by Executive Order 11,246. The EEOC file, already open. The FBI Financial Crimes Division, already notified. Each slide landed like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples moved visibly across the faces at the table. Keene stopped writing. Lydia closed her eyes for a moment that lasted slightly too long to be a blink. Hollings gripped the arm of his chair with both hands now. Marcus spoke for the first time. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because 73 people deserve to have their names spoken out loud in a room with a view. He opened his own folder. A single page. 12 names, handwritten. He read them without rushing, giving each one the space it had been denied in 6 years of executive summaries and procedural dismissals. Reginald Carter, Danielle Washington, Tomas Herrera, Priya Anand, Jerome Saunders, Keisha Monroe, David Oyalaran, Maria Fuentes, Andre Williams, Sandra Liu, Robert Tate, Jasmine Cole. The room absorbed the names the way dry ground absorbs water, slowly, completely, with no possibility of returning to what it was before. These aren't case numbers. They're people with families, with rent due and daughters asking questions and bank accounts that don't survive the month. He closed the folder. I had $312 when your company offered me silence. I chose to spend it on gas driving to courthouses and coffee shops where former employees told me what you did to them. That math made more sense to me than anything in your severance agreement. Hollings spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had just watched the foundation of his company develop cracks in real time. We'll cooperate. Keene began to outline terms, reinstatement, back pay, additional compensation, and Marcus felt the room shift toward resolution, toward the institutional instinct to package damage into something signable. He stood before Keene finished. No. The word landed the way it had in the cold open, but now it carried the full weight of 11 days, and the room understood what it hadn't understood before, that this was not defiance, it was accounting. Marcus Brooks had calculated the cost of returning to a building that had erased him, and the number didn't work. I'll take the 3 months severance. No NDA. If anyone asks what happened here, I tell the truth. All of it. He looked at Victoria. She met his eyes this time, fully, without flinching, without the wall she'd maintained in every previous encounter. I hope you learn the difference between fear and cruelty, because from where I stood, they felt exactly the same. He walked out. The hallway was quiet. Reggie Okafor nodded once as he passed, the way soldiers acknowledge each other, brief, wordless, sufficient. Within 60 days, the machinery of consequence completed its work. Todd Brennan was terminated. 11 complaints finally read by someone who intended to act on them. Lydia Marsh resigned under pressure. Her 6 years of procedural dismissals now entered into the EEOC record. Keene's firm was released from its contract with Hargrove and Sterling. 73 families received a combined $3.8 million in settlements, averaging $52,054 per person. Not enough to undo what had been done, but enough to be heard. Claire Nguyen was offered her position back. She declined. Colin Mitchum hired her as a paralegal at a 22% raise, and on her first day, she placed a small gray elephant figurine on her desk that she never explained to anyone. Victoria Sterling resigned voluntarily. No one forced her. She simply could not sit in the building anymore. Not with 73 signatures bearing her name on resolutions she now understood to be instruments of erasure. 6 months later, she was doing pro bono HR audits for a legal aid clinic. Workplace discrimination cases. The kind that arrived in manila folders carried by people who couldn't afford lawyers. The pay was 60% less. The apartment was smaller. The work made sense in a way that nothing at Hargrove ever had. She wrote Marcus a letter, not an email, handwritten, sent through the postal service on plain paper without a letterhead. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know what I think about what you said, about fear and cruelty feeling the same. You were right. I'm trying to learn the difference. Marcus read it, folded it, placed it in the drawer where the unsigned severance agreement had once been. He did not reply, but he did not throw it away. 8 months later, a Wednesday in June, the kind of day where the light arrives early and stays late, and the air smells like cut grass and possibility. Marcus worked at Meridian Analytics now. Smaller firm, 20 minutes farther from home, 12% less pay, an office where the coffee tasted like it had been brewed as an afterthought. But when he walked through the door each morning, nobody whispered. Nobody watched him from the corners of their eyes. Nobody had decided who he was before he opened his mouth. At 3:15, he pulled up to Lincoln Elementary. Maya climbed into the back seat with her usual theatrical exhaustion, dropped her backpack on the floor, and grinned at him with the gap-toothed confidence of a girl who had recently won first place in the science fair and intended to mention it at every opportunity for the foreseeable future. We're doing a project on heroes. Mrs. Patterson says pick someone we admire and write about why. Yeah? Who'd you pick? You. His throat tightened. He adjusted the rearview mirror. An old trick, buying time, one she would probably see through within a year. I'm not a hero, sweetheart. You are to me. She delivered it with the same unshakable certainty she applied to the superiority of pulp and orange juice and the scientific method, as fact, not opinion, not open for debate. He pulled away from the curb, merged into traffic. The sun came through the windshield at the angle that turns ordinary things golden, and for a moment the 12-year-old sedan looked almost new. On the back seat, Maya opened her notebook. Professor sat beside her, left ear resewn for the third time, still holding. She wrote in pencil, the large, uneven letters of a third grader composing something important. My Hero by Maya Brooks. My dad is a hero because he helped someone even when it was scary. And when people were mean to him, he didn't be mean back. He just kept being good. Mom used to say, hard things are the most important things. I think she was right. Marcus didn't see the page. He only saw her in the rearview mirror, serious-faced, writing something with the concentration she gave to everything that mattered, Professor Listing gently against her shoulder as the car took a turn. And for the first time in 8 months, the weight he'd been carrying shifted. Not gone, not forgotten, but redistributed, shared now between a man who had refused to trade his dignity for safety and a girl who understood, with the clarity that only children possess, that goodness is not measured by what it costs you, but by whether you choose it anyway. 73 families received checks. 1 company was reformed. 4 federal investigations were opened. But the thing that mattered most was smaller than all of that. Small enough to fit in the back seat of a sedan that smelled like library books, holding a stuffed elephant with a resewn ear, writing about her father in pencil because some truths are too important for pen.